Welcome, Starseeds. My name is Oriah, and I'm here with metaphysician Dennis Strahl in our third episode. Due to popular demand, actually, Dennis's stories of his adventures at Contact in the Desert over the last, I guess, 10 years, right, Dennis?
7 years.
7 years.
7 years, yes.
And 30 plus years in just his metaphysical studies that he's done as an enthusiast on the side. He's been to so many panels. He's listened to so many speakers and experts around the world that have come to many different kinds of symposiums and UFO conferences over the years. And he is an avid mineral, I guess you would call yourself a mineral excavator.
A prospector. I love to go out and find extractable minerals for all the things that we take for granted that are made with gold and silver and metals of all kinds.
So this episode is so exciting. You are not going to want to miss one single word of what we're going to talk about. We are going to talk about how Starseed alien influence has advanced our human technology over the last 100 years. We're going to bounce around a lot. We're going to talk about other things. At this point, Dennis and I agreed going off in tangents is a good thing because we really have a lot of information we'd like to share and discuss. And this will very well be a 2-part series, or it could even be a 3-part series. So let's just see where this takes us. And I'm very excited to begin. So Dennis, I have my little cheat sheet here, and we were discussing the first thing that we wanted to talk about was we wanted to talk about how Pleiadians and, well, first of all, we wanted to clear the air about the difference and distinction about aliens and starseeds and what's the difference. So what I had mentioned in my studies to you was I believe starseeds are from the stars. So we basically are star beings. And it's actually technical. You do have minerals. Us humans have minerals in our bodies that are scientifically proven that are actually in outer space.
Yes, so true.
So we are technically from the stars. So anybody who's from the stars is a starseed. Anybody who is not living on the planet, we like to call them an alien. Now, aliens call us aliens, I'm sure. So we're aliens to another species, but for us, when we see somebody coming interstellar off planet towards the grid, towards the Earth, we see them as aliens. So I think that's my definition of what I think is the difference. So today when Dennis is going to be talking about alien technology, keep in mind he's talking about otherworldly, advanced technology, advanced civilization that has come to the planet. So this goes all the way back. I mean, I know, obviously, we know the wheel and fire was brought most likely from star beings, but this also includes the Egyptian pyramids and all the different hieroglyphics that prove that they came to share information on energy, light, irrigation, agriculture, right? And I'm sure you're aware.
Yes. And in fact, in respect to that, I've always found it interesting. I'm sure many of you watching this right now have been big fans of the television show Ancient Aliens.
Right.
Usually airing on the History Channel, which is a combination. It's not just UFOs, but it's the archaeology behind the UFOs. And when you mention Egypt, if you've watched many of the documentaries, carved into the rock and all the hieroglyphics are these they look just like little spaceships, they look like helicopters, and they find those same symbols, not just in Egypt, but, on the inside walls of Mayan temples and temples in South America and Peru and Brazil. So, and some of them are identical. So you have to say to yourself, well, way back then, however long ago those were done, 5,000 years ago, was it the same person traveling around? Or did all of the people doing those carvings have identical imaginations? Or
that's true.
Yeah.
The carvings show different types of alien forms, from the avians with the beak.
Yes.
To the elongated.
The skulls, yes.
Skulls that you can go to the Egyptian Cairo Museum and you'll see the actual elongated skulls there.
Yes.
So
well, I believe that probably all of those people spread all around the planet that were doing those carvings had seen the same beings and were good artists. And that's why we see all the similarities all around the world.
And back then, I believe the Earth was Pangea, right? So that's when everything was more fused. Am I saying correctly? Yeah, so the land travel was more easier, and then, you know, we can intersperse easily. I mean, you can imagine like a ship can land, send some people out, and it's easier to get to everybody if it's all connected in one big mass. Yeah.
Exactly. And then if you follow the stories, of course, of Atlantis and Lemuria, that's pretty much what people feel broke all the continents up and spread everybody out. And, you know, well, there are a lot of interesting, I don't want to get off track here, a lot of interesting stories behind that. But to get back to the technology, when you look at just over the last 150 years, okay, go back to, say, the mid-1800s, and 3 or 4 of us are riding along on our horses down a trail, and somebody would try to describe to you something called a cell phone, or a microwave oven, or a radio transmission. Radio waves are invisible. Microwaves are invisible. The energy between our cell phones traveling through the air. Pretty mystical when you think about it.
Right.
So only 150 years ago, to try to talk to somebody about this kind of stuff, you have to ask yourself, okay, well, what caused that acceleration over the last 150 years?
Exactly.
Because for 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years prior to that, I mean, for all of those years, they didn't get past much more than the invention of the wheel, you know? I mean, there was no technology whatsoever.
Right.
There are carvings of that technology, as you pointed out. In fact, there are in some of those Egyptian carvings, and you've been there, I believe that there are some depictions. They're almost like giant horn-shaped electricity producers. Because one of the things, and it's funny, things that don't occur to you until you hear somebody say, but they always say, you know, if they were using torches when they painted all those things on the inside walls of a pyramid anywhere, there's always pitch and black tar on the ceilings, and there's no way to get it all off. You'll know if somebody was in there with torches to light their way while they painted all of those hieroglyphs. So when there's no trace of that at all in the Egyptian pyramids and many of the other pyramids, okay, well, how are they lighting it up well enough to do all of those intricate carvings and paintings?
Yeah, because it's pitch black in those tunnels. I've been in
right,
there. Yeah.
Right. So then that begs the question, okay, well, if they did have some sort of electricity producing technology, did they get that from ETs, as you were pointing out? You know, you can see like the blue avians with the feathers and the beaks and all in many of these Egyptian writings. They just don't happen to include, I guess, I don't read hieroglyphs, and I think still many people do, but they never really mention where those unusual beings are from or what they were called. You know, were they Arcturians? Were they Pleiadians? Were they Syrians? There's all these different star systems that many of us are from. And then somebody like Tesla comes along and invents alternating current, which is exactly what we use when we plug in the wall today. Well, he did that in 1888. So why didn't somebody figure out electricity, alternating current? And about that same time, of course, Edison was working on direct current. And that would have taken a lot heavier gauge wire to wire up the whole country. There's a lot of drawbacks to direct current, which is why we have alternating current. But the point is an interesting time frame here, okay? Tesla figured it out back in 1888. So for all those 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years before that, what was man doing? Was he just really, really ignorant for a lot of years? I don't know.
Right.
But
Well, there
You know,
was a lot of mathematical and medical discoveries in the East, obviously, as we know, like in India and Africa and Egypt. But, there was just so much, very, very high level astronomy and astrology that was happening at that time. But
yes,
I want to jump to modern day history when we reversed engineered the first UFO documented at Roswell.
yes,
That's when the lid came off. And
yes,
that's when everybody started to say, well, what can we do with this technology?
exactly.
And what has occurred since then has been widespread and it's changed our lives forever. So there's people right now looking at their plasma screen TV, and that plasma device was reverse engineered and discovered actually on a light ship at Roswell. These are the type of things that we're using today that was left or found or brought to us from starseeds. So you mentioned, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say same thing with lasers. Information traveling on light. And a current excellent example of that is what they call an optical audio cable. If you buy a new soundbar for your television, this little teeny tiny thin wire comes with it, and they call it an optical audio cable because it's going to take the audio from the TV and feed it to your soundbar. Well, it's actually a little laser beam in there. And that's the highest quality that you can have. All the new components, whether you buy, Marantz or Yamaha or Bose or Denon, they're all using optical audio. Well, who would have thought that we could send a voice, music, whatever, on a beam of light? Where did that come from? We take these things, for granted, but when you really think about them, they're pretty mystical.
Well, maybe we're here on a beam of light.
Yes.
Maybe our holographic image was beamed here and we've manifested ourselves. We're like the sound and the song that came to be, right?
Yes.
The mystical sounds of being human. So Tesla, what's interesting about that is I was noticing in our notes that, and I can't see, there was somebody, hold on a second. So there was somebody who is considered the reincarnation.
Oh, yes. That's an interesting story.
Yes. Who is that?
Okay, his name is Patrick Flanagan, Flanagan. You can find videos on YouTube and all. He just recently passed away, just this last year. His wife is still alive, lives in Cottonwood, Arizona. And quite a few years back, what he became most contemporarily well known for was his quantum physics chemistry, in a manner of speaking. He came up with something called microclusters, which multiple nutritional supplements companies would use and purchase from him, because those microclusters would make their nutrients, whether it was vitamin E or vitamin C or something special, to absorb in your body much more effectively. So a lot of people found out who Patrick Flanagan was through that process. He didn't admit publicly until he was 50 years old that he was one of the reincarnations of Nikola Tesla, because he says, look what they did to me the first time. And he didn't want it to, he was gun shy, so to say. He didn't want it to happen again. But
now, see the guy that he had over 2,000, I can't find it now. He had 2,000 or 5,000 US patents for free energy devices.
The US government hired him as a research scientist at Los Alamos when he was only 19 years old. And 2 or 3 of his patents had already been stamped. What is the term they use? A threat to national security.
Okay.
You will not develop this product and manufacture it and put it out on the marketplace. So that was prior to them hiring. In other words, they were watching the patents that he was filing, and holy Toledo, this kid is freaking brilliant. We have to block the development of this device. And who knows why they do that? I mean, where you got the 5,000 from is because people do this kind of research all the time, and people go into because you can find categorically what something was if it's been stamped national security risk. And there are over 5,000 free energy device patents that have been blocked by the US Patent Office and by the US government.
So can you explain what a free energy device is? Because a lot of people don't know what that term means.
Sure. Energy generation, as we understand it, normally requires some sort of fuel to produce it, okay?
Mm-hmm.
So, whether it's a hydroelectric plant, like at Niagara Falls, where the big turbines turn, from the water falling down the falls, and then that generates electricity. We have coal burning plants that generate electricity. You can go down to Home Depot and buy a gasoline run generator that'll produce electricity that you can take out camping and run stuff on, but they always require fuel. Well, quantum energy is fuel. It's what we're made of. We wouldn't be talking right now and seeing each other if that quantum energy wasn't energized. So there's energy that permeates everything. I always like to remind people, when you talk about quantum particles, which are way smaller than atoms, there is no space between us because we're all floating around and walking around in this ocean of quantum particles. And I always like to say, can you tell me, please, where there are not any quantum particles? Where are the gaps? There aren't any. And that's what connects us all. That quantum soup that has lightning fast communication via telepathy, for example. When remote viewers, for example, for any of you that have never heard the term remote viewing, that means closing your eyes and going into a meditative state and being able to see, hear, and sometimes even smell things at a distance. And here in the United States, I know this is a little divergent, but this is technology, I think, too, that ties in with the ETs and how they communicate telepathically. So back in the 70s, I guess they call them black ops, nobody's not supposed to know about this. The US government started a remote viewing research team at Stanford University. And fortunately, right now today, I still have a friend over in Sedona that was a part of that team. She was a part of that team. She knew all of those people. And the reason the US government decided to do it is because they had found out through the grapevine, so to say, that the Chinese and the Russians were psychically eavesdropping on, our Congress and our Senate, or maybe in the Oval Office itself with whatever president was present at the time. So they wanted to investigate to see if it was for real, because if they're eavesdropping psychically on us that way, we want to be able to do the same thing. Well, one of the gentlemen that we'll talk about here in a little while by the name of Ep3 Smith, who for the last 3 years was one of the keynote speakers at Contact in the Desert. And he tells stories about some of the ETs that he has met, having been in the military as an autopsy specialist in the medical field. And he worked in the deep underground facilities, 18, 20, 30 stories deep under the ground. But pretty much all of the ETs that he talks about actually communicated with, all communicated with telepathy.
Mm-hmm.
Well, pretty much remote viewing is communicating with objects or people at a distance. So, yes, so are we able to do that because of the Pleiadian and Arcturian and Sirian DNA that we have? Is that where those little receptor antennas are? Or is it our energy field? We have like 7 layers in our aura, and each layer represents a different color. The reason it's a different color is because it's a different frequency. Every color has a corresponding frequency. And I believe that that our starseed brothers and sisters in the ships are all experts at telepathy. And because we're their children in a manner of speaking, we have it too. And you may not have grasped it yet. You know, I want you all to understand that between Oriah and Riz and I, we've been studying all of these types of things for so long that we tend to take things for granted. We'll talk about things very, very matter-of-factly that are sometimes shocking to other people because they've never heard about it before. And so to share with you, this is something that Oriah had wanted me to share. The Contact in the Desert event started up, well, 8 years ago. It got canceled this year because of what else going on. But for the first 7 years, it was a 4-day event every year from 8 in the morning till 10 at night. There'd be at least 5 different lecture rooms, full to the brim, from morning till night. So at any given hour or segment of time, and you want to go listen, sit down in the room and listen to somebody, well, you got 5 to choose from.
Can you tell me what type of people are invited to Contact in the Desert? Who are the panelists?
Yes. Oh, what an incredible array of people. Many of the speakers, for those of you that are familiar with Ancient Aliens, you would have seen many of the speakers at Contact in the Desert, except the difference is on a segment of Ancient Aliens, they might have 10 or 12 or 14 different experts in a 1-hour segment. So you're hearing this guy's perspective for 10 minutes on a particular subject matter. You're hearing the next person's 10-minute review on that subject matter. Now you're able to hear those same experts for an hour and a half nonstop. So they're just pouring out all the information.
And they're talking about everything from cattle mutilation to crop circles to reverse engineering, government cover-ups, et cetera.
Yes,
right?
all that stuff. So to name a few names that people may have heard of before.
Right.
Okay? And some that they wouldn't have, but they will have heard of what they did.
Right.
Good old Erich von Däniken from Austria. He is probably considered to be the founder of the whole modern day UFO movement because back in the 70s, he wrote a book called Chariots of the Gods, which became so big that Paramount Pictures made a movie called Chariots of the Gods. And some of the very things that he was exploring, which he still is, he still makes trips down to Machu Picchu and places like that. And he's up in his late 80s. He's like 87 or 88 years old now, still travels all over the world. But he was studying those hieroglyphics that you and Riz saw in Egypt, and examining in particular the ones that look like little spaceships.
Right.
And then he'd find the same ones at Machu Picchu.
Right.
And he'd find the same ones, the same ones in a Mexican Mayan pyramid.
That's right.
So he was the one that actually started putting photographs into books of all of these different carvings around the world. And it was that he was asking the same question that I was asking, you know. Well, was it the same guy traveling around? Or did everybody have the same imagination? Or did that everybody see those same unusual aircraft and or unusual looking beings because it was the ETs that were traveling around and then people painted and carved what they saw.
Right.
So Erich von Däniken has been a guest speaker every year. He's sensational. At the end of most of the speakers will speak at least 4 or 5 times over the 4-day weekend. Okay? And Erich von Däniken would get a standing ovation every single time. David Wilcock, who has been on many, many, many episodes of Ancient Aliens, he always gets a standing ovation. And it's not like people are going, well, I should probably stand up out of respect. Everybody's so freaking excited about the information that they learned, they can't help it. Everybody excitedly stands up and gives these people huge rounds of applause.
Well, I think David Wilcox has been actually taken off of YouTube, from what I've heard.
Yes. Yeah. A lot of these people are being censored.
And
you know, it used to just be...
His last video was very long. I tried to watch the whole thing, the one that he just put out. I think it was in January. And he was saying that, you know, he has death threats and whatnot, you know, so he has to be very careful. So his whole life has changed because he's disclosed so much information.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, this year, had this whole COVID thing not happened, we had Contact in the Desert again. It would have been last weekend, by the way. He was not attending. He was not going to attend for the very first time this year. It would have been year 8, specifically because of the security risks, as you were mentioning. I mean, in all the previous years, he would bring along his own 2 armed guards. Plus, have his usually he would have his trained German Shepherd up on the stage with him. You know, so he had to be really, really careful. There's a lot of people out there that, you know, you never know. Is it just that they don't want this information out, or, you know, they think he's some sort of a nutcase or whatever? But yeah, these people, it changes their lives.
Well, in the case of like free energy, so basically that just means instead of having to pay your Edison or your SoCal or whatever company, you are getting free energy, just like it's free to breathe oxygen.
Yes, and for example, now in relation to that, Nikola Tesla built a tower, the Tesla Tower, somewhere in the Midwest. I forget exactly where it was built. And he built and designed that for everybody to have free electricity around the world. And his financier, who was J.P. Morgan, was in the copper business. And he planned on, you know, wiring up the whole country with copper wire. And what household doesn't have copper wires in the walls? You plug something into the wall, you're plugging into copper wiring. And he didn't want to lose that marketplace, so he's the one, and he paid for it, that burned that tower down because he didn't want everybody to have free energy. But when I talk about a free energy device, and I'll clarify that, let's say that you could go down to Home Depot or Lowe's or Ace Hardware, and for, I don't know, $500 or $1,000, buy a widget that you could just hang on your, about the size of a backpack, you hang it on the inside of your garage wall, you call up your electrician, say, yeah, hook my whole house up to that, to my main panel, and disconnect me from the grid and from my electricity provider forever, because that little device will generate electricity for 50 or 100 years, or maybe forever, and I'm never going to have an electricity bill again.
Well, this also goes true to cars. This also is true to many things.
Absolutely. Oh, yeah.
It's true for cars and for many other things. That's sustainable energy, that's renewable resourcing, renewable energy that you don't have to pay to gas up your vehicle. You don't have to pay to light up your house. You don't have to pay to clean your water. So these big companies, these big corporations don't want this. And so they shut down all these innovators and visionaries and people who have worked so hard, dedicated their whole life, sold the farm, mortgaged their houses. The kids didn't go to school. Everything was to get the patents out, to get the dream out, to change the world.
Exactly.
And third world countries and everything. And they were shut down one at a time. And there's so many stories. You know, there's so many stories.
Yes. Well,
shut down.
What I'm hoping is, yes, what will happen eventually, perhaps. No different than right now, we have a lot of different car brands to choose from, right? You can get a Chevrolet, you can get a Ferrari, you can get a Cadillac, you can get a Hyundai. I think that one day there will be, you go down to Home Depot and there might be 10 different free energy devices to choose from. But looping that back to Contact in the Desert, and I'll just mention for the folks that are listening, have never heard of Contact in the Desert, 2 other really prominent keynote speakers that I mentioned to Oriah earlier. She wanted me to bring them up, and I did too. One is John D'Souza. John D'Souza was the real X-Files investigator for the FBI before the TV show X-Files ever existed.
Right.
And he's been there every single year. Well, one of the stories, the first time I heard him speak, that I remember him telling, that was pretty darn interesting. He says, you know, since I was the real guy, and that's very much compartmentalized, just like the military does, the same thing in the FBI, says, a lot of my fellow agents didn't even know what I did. It was that secret, what I did. And he was the chief UFO investigator, if you will, for the FBI. That's what the X-Files was all about. And anything paranormal, too. Those of us that have seen the TV show. Anyway, he says, so when they launched that TV show, he says, man, you know, I turned that TV on. I was interested. You know, what are they going to show? How realistic is it going to be? where are they getting their stories from? And about the third or fourth episode, he says about 10 minutes into it, I realized, hey, that's one of my investigations. Almost verbatim. Who's getting into my files? And he says, all those years, but every third or fourth episode, he says, it was a story out of my files, an investigation that I had done. He says, I was never able to figure out who was getting into my files or how they were getting into them, but my actual story. So what you all thought was fiction, he's saying to the audience, was very often the truth because I was the investigator. And so when you hear somebody like that 7 years in a row, he's telling all these different stories, you begin to realize, well, everybody that's up on those stages, they're not a bunch of fruitcakes. They're really smart people. Nick Pope is another one. He was the British government's chief UFO investigator for 18 years. He speaks every year at Contact.
And what are the investigations about? What do they primarily consist of?
Most of it is about UFO sightings, to go out and collect whatever evidence that they can to see if it was really an unidentified or unidentifiable object, or was it, like they said at Roswell, oh, that was a weather balloon, which I don't know how many people out there know this, but apparently the day after the first newspaper report in the Roswell newspaper said that the government had recovered a crashed UFO. And then, of course, the government stepped right in, the bigger boys up higher, I guess, and said, no. That was you got to change the story. That was just a weather balloon. Yeah.
And then the news changed, because the headlines were, in the beginning, they were honest and they just talked about what was happening. And then that
exactly.
Changed. And then the story became that it was weather balloons.
Exactly. Yeah. So looping this back now around to things that I've learned at Contact in the Desert, and to the free energy devices that we're talking about. You'll hear many of the different speakers there say, well, we all have a different perspective here on whether or not we think, there's sufficient evidence to really believe that there are beings on other planets that visit our planet, all that kind of stuff. But there's one thing that we all agree on, hands down, no contest, because we sit around and talk at lunchtime, in between our lectures, and we share information. And the one thing that we all agree on is, what would be the number one reason that governments would suppress the reality of UFOs? And they all agree that the reason is that everybody's going to ask, what is the propulsion mechanism for that UFO? Because if it's traveling across 2 galaxies to get here, they're not hauling along a bunch of gasoline or diesel fuel or compressed gas or anything like that. It's got to be some sort of a quantum energy generator thing that has no exhaust, doesn't pollute, and it'll generate as much energy as you want, including enough to travel across galaxies. Well, jeepers, what if I had one? What if it's only this big and I can put it in my garage and power my whole house? Well, they don't want people asking those questions. They don't want.
Well, I'd like to offer an idea, and
yes.
maybe you already know, and you're going to tell me, but here's what I think is, there is nanotechnology that exists today that is bioengineering that can help paraplegics and people who have no use of, they can't use their arms or their limbs. The neurology is not connected anymore for whatever injury, like a spinal injury or some sort of severing of the nerves. And they now have devices that can hook you up. And with your thought, you can move your arm, you can pick up a cup, you can move it to your mouth, all just thinking about it. So now if you see this motion, so here, I might be the first one saying this, or maybe it's been out, but I'm going to finish my projection, my futuristic projection.
No, this is good.
So let's say I have the device hooked to my head, and I can move this cup from here to here, and I can move it down. So this is motion, this is movement. This articulation is coming from an entity, whether it's connected to you or it could be a machine, and it is being used with your own biological thinking process, your own brain. So now your brain is moving this cup. This is existing today in the medical community right now. You can look it up. So imagine, let's just fast forward 100 years.
Yes.
This cup is now a machine that can fit 10 people. And your brain says, go to Mars.
Yes.
Heard it first. You heard it here.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been studying this biotechnology for a while, and I could really see the advancements in technology and where it's going. And I definitely, this is sustainable energy. I mean, this is the era of energy, and this is what we're after. Humans are after what they believe is their birthright. So how do we change out of the old and go into solar energy, sustainable energy, mental energy?
Yes.
You're using your brain energy. That's energy. It carries an
Yes.
electrical
Oh,
impulse.
absolutely.
You have your solar energy, and you have this available to you right now. Resourceful, usable energy that's constantly re-energizing. It's free, and you could use it all the time. So we can sustain our vehicles, we can sustain our homes, and we haven't done it yet. And I think the only reason why it hasn't been done is when it comes to a solar capacity, I just don't think that there is a mechanism that's sensitive enough to be able to harness the power of the sun in a fast, synergistic way that can turn it around. Right now you have big, huge panels, and that's not easy for people.
Correct. And, one of the other things that a lot of people don't take into account as far as reasons why governments would suppress something like that, okay? And it's related to taxation, okay? Like here in the Palm Springs area, this would apply to anybody that's watching this. We have cities, counties, states, and the federal level. So my electric bill, for example, the city that I live in gets a little piece. There's some money there going to them. There's the base amount that the electric company, and I happen to be with Edison. Edison gets the big chunk, but the city gets a piece of me every month on my electric bill and my water bill and my gas bill. The county of Riverside gets a piece. The state of California gets a piece, and the feds get a piece. So let's just narrow it down to one state, okay? You think of all of the electric meters there are in the whole state of California for residential, commercial combined. How much money do you think the state of California makes per month just in what they're taxing the utilities? Huge amounts. Now it's interesting, I've tried to find that figure because usually anything government, you can go to a .gov website, there's statistics on everything. Try to find out how much money a state makes in what they tax on the utilities.
Right.
So that cash flow would come to a screeching halt if everybody had a free energy device. In fact, I've heard about some states now wanting to put a meter onto your solar panels for the purpose of taxing you for the free energy that you're producing with hardware that you capitalized.
That's incredible.
That's how important that taxation is to them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, gee, there's too many people now putting these solar panels in, and we're not getting taxation on that portion of their electricity.
Well, the reason I decided to go ahead with this interview and talk about these things, it wasn't because I wanted to pit one person against the other, one faction against the other, one system against the other, right? What I wanted to do was inform. So just like in law enforcement, there's starting to be an information overload about how the police force is actually, like how it's navigating, how it's operating, right? From the captain down. And so there's like a big re-evaluation of the protocol. Right. So would you say that there is people saying there's one team against another, we're against police officers? No, what's actually happening is they're saying, no, let's see what's actually happening in the infrastructure so we can improve it.
Exactly.
We have less mistakes.
Create new synergy from what we already have. And that's, my perspective on the free energy devices is, okay, let's say that tomorrow, by some mystical way, everybody has their own free energy device and they never have another electric bill. What's that going to do to the economy? Wow. If you never have an electric bill, then you're going to spend more money on food and cars and college tuitions and, swimming pool for your backyard, whatever. All of those things would stimulate the economy.
Correct.
To a substantial degree, I believe.
Right. Now, when the state takes the money, the biggest thing is allocation, right? So where does it go? So we wanted to go to our highways, and we wanted to go to our children's schools and our health.
Exactly.
So that is the big conversation, right? And it's just an evolutionary growth pattern that's definitely
absolutely
happening. But videos like this, conversations like this, interviews like this, where we are bringing it to the forefront, there's people watching us right now that have never clicked on a UFO research, reversing, information piece. No, they're not interested, or it doesn't appeal to them. But the reason I felt like it was important for our United Starseed Connection group, it was important for me to bring it up, is because I just wanted to show people it's okay to understand these things. You don't have to get upset about it. It's just a part of evolution. It's a part of our history. It's part of our future. It's a part of where we're going. But it's good to be informed. So we're informing you of what's happening.
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think too, long before all this stuff that's going on right now, my stock answer when people say, well, hey, if they were real, they would have landed by now. Why don't they just come right out in the open? And so I like to say, well, if you were orbiting the planet right now in a cloaked ship, and you could monitor all of the TV and radio transmissions on the planet, have translation devices, you understand what the Russians are saying, what the Chinese are saying, what the Americans are saying, and you're listening in and you're going, well, I don't think right now is a good time to land. Why? They're still fighting amongst themselves on their own planet, not just from country to country, but look what's going on in the US right now.
Yeah.
Bad time for us to land. They come after us too, because we're different. Why? Because we're different.
Well, there's a stage of disbelief that people are going through also, where people are starting to question everything and not believe hardly anything they see anymore. So even if a UFO were to land on our front lawn and aliens were to walk right into our house, that story would still be considered false. And
exactly.
Nobody would believe it. And that's
because of hologram technology. I saw a video recently of a good old-fashioned high school gymnasium basketball court with the grandstands, and somebody brought in some holographic equipment, and it literally looked like the basketball court, which was all empty, had water, ocean water, and a whale breaks up out of the water, and you can tell by the looks on the children's faces, they're all like 10, 12, 13 years old.
I've seen that video.
Yeah, it looks so real.
It looks so real.
So how would you know that a UFO wasn't a hologram that somebody created just to fool you? Right?
Right.
So
well,
that's what makes people question.
There's people that, that they say a lot of these UFOs that we're seeing, those are drone ships. Those are U.S. military reverse engineered ships.
Some of them may be.
Yeah, and it's true. It can. But nevertheless, it's about energy, and it's about us learning from these star beings how to use energy. And, Tesla's I think he's doing a great job. He's moving the conversation forward. There is free energy for Tesla vehicles. I think it's way too expensive until there's more competition.
Yes.
But I think his vehicle so far is the best energy emitting vehicle out there. Just based on what I've seen and heard. It could be hype. I don't know. Some people can probably correct me on that, but so far it just feels like Tesla is kind of running.
There's a college not but 5 or 6 blocks away from me here in the desert, where they put in, I think 5,000 or 6,000 solar panels mounted on the top of carports. And not only does it power the entire college, but they've got plug-ins on the posts that's for electric cars.
I've been in one of those.
Yeah.
They're fascinating.
Yeah.
I was very impressed when I saw
them. So the students that have electric cars get to charge up for free when they're in class. Their cars out there plugged in, charging up for free.
I mean, with the way things are looking with oil and the way things are going, it looks like we're going to have to go into energy emitting vehicles ASAP. And I think that the big companies, especially American made vehicles, are going to start, and I'm sure European and other Asian are going to start going strictly to energy. And I think it's going to happen soon. They're going to pull the gas guzzlers and all the the oil vehicles are going to just pull off the market. I think they're not going to even make them anymore because, it's just an archaic expression of transportation in every single way.
Well, and something else that could happen, somebody could develop an alternative fuel of some sort okay?
Which they have.
Yes, that would replace the gasoline or the diesel in your vehicle, and it would never pollute again, and you'd be able to keep the same vehicle.
Well, so there's people who have developed, water in the vehicle. It's like you can use water. Some people have used corn, which then we're going back to the corn.
Hydrogen.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of future possibilities. And, one of the most interesting speakers that David Wilcock brought to the table at Contact in the Desert, for me personally, having listened to a lot of these people for a long time, had some of the most interesting and exceptional and in-depth information about the ETs, because and his name is Emery Smith, spelled E-M-E-R-Y. And Emery was primarily, he was an MD in the Marines, but a really, really good one. So he did autopsies in these deep underground facilities on ETs. And how he tells the story, I'm paraphrasing here, but he says, everybody's heard that I've done 3,000 autopsies. That doesn't mean 3,000 full-bodied ETs. Did I get a complete body from time to time? Yes. But he says sometimes it was just a piece of tissue, or what I could tell maybe it was a finger, maybe it was twice as long as ours are, or a limb of some sort, a leg or a foot. And I was never allowed to ask any questions. He said they'd give me the specimen. They'd have a list of things that they wanted me to test for, test its DNA, test the composition of the tissue or whatever, and hand us the sample back and the your analysis, and we'll bring you another one tomorrow. So he says at the end of the day, I'd ride up that elevator up 30, 40 stories back up to the surface and go home just like all the rest of you. But meanwhile, when I was down there, did I sometimes work with ETs during those autopsies that would actually help me because they were a lot smarter than I was? Yes. Did they all communicate with telepathy only? Yes. One that he told about was the one that looks like a praying mantis. It's about 7 or 8 feet tall. And he says, the first time you meet one, the sight of it alone kind of takes you aback. But he says they're extremely intelligent, have an incredible sense of humor. And so once they start talking to you in your head, and they can hear all of your thoughts, he says you realize, wow, they're happy to help. They're really, really smart. They have a great sense of humor. And so he's had many, many experiences experimenting or analyzing all of these different...
Dennis, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. You blanked out for a moment and your lighting has changed.
Okay, hold on a second.
No problem.
So my power just went out as we're talking about government and energy and electricity.
Oh my
power is out right now. I have this ring light. My husband's talking to me. We're filming still, and I'm going to put this on so everybody can hear what's happening. So this light is connected to my laptop. Watch this. That's why I have light. So now wow. I'm going to turn it back on.
Okay.
Now this light is connected to my laptop. My laptop is charged. My power went out, and you and I are talking about sustainable energy on the planet and why the government's trying to shut it down, this conversation.
Yes, because I was wondering how you still had an internet connection. I was wondering.
I'm on hotspot right now.
Oh, okay, good.
I'm still blown away that this is happening right at this moment.
Yes. Well, you start talking about sensitive things that they don't want people. We haven't talked about anything that isn't out in accessible on YouTube and in books, and all this information is accessible. I'm not telling about anything that's classified. I'm just repeating what I've heard that thousands of people have listened to at Contact in the Desert year after year.
I just need to have a moment. We need to have a moment, Dee.
Yes.
Everyone is going to be in on this right now. Okay. I want everybody to understand what's happening. You see this ring light?
Yes.
This ring light is connected by a little USB cord that's stuck to my laptop. My laptop is charged. It has 100% charge because it was plugged in. All the lights have just gone out on the entire property.
Wow. You know that Emery Smith used to live up in the canyons there in Malibu, just like David Wilcock did, and just like you folks do.
Yeah.
And they've had strange things happen. So, based on the number of people,
just came back.
There we go. Good. But it makes you wonder, doesn't it, when something like that happens?
It makes you wonder. It makes you think about it, for sure.
Yes, because they're thinking, how many people are going to watch this video? And now we've got all those new people are out there looking into UFOs, looking into free energy devices. Are they real? Oh, gee, there's 5,000 patents that have been suppressed by the U.S. government, all specifically for some sort of free energy device. Well, you have to say to yourself, okay, number one, they don't issue a patent unless your widget works, right?
Right.
You can't get a patent.
Right.
So even somebody that's skeptical, okay, well, let's say that only 10 of them worked out of 5,000. Well, that means that there could be 10 different free energy devices for you to choose from down at Home Depot or Lowe's right now. That theoretically, if you had one of those, you wouldn't pay any tax on your electric bill.
That's a lot of money.
Yes, it is. It's a huge cash flow.
Yes.
A huge cash flow. So is it in the financial interests of any government to suppress that kind of information? Yeah, or technology? Yes, it is. It's in their financial interests to, but the thing is like I explained before, I believe, it's just my personal perception, that if nobody had an electric bill anymore, they'd be spending that money on all kinds of other things that would stimulate the economy and make up for it probably way more than the fear.
I'm still not done with the power outage. Hold on.
Right ahead.
First of all, we get power outages here all the time that are scheduled and planned, right?
Right.
And they work on our wires, and that's fine. In this particular case, it's like it was almost like a little bit of a warning. Like,
yes,
we're listening.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm so hot right now. I'm like burning up.
I don't know if I mentioned this in a previous segment, but even if I did, I think I remember me telling you the story about listening to Art Bell late one night.
Right, I remember Art Bell.
Talk show guy, yeah. And he was talking about something really, really, really strange. I mean, really sensitive. Not strange. Very, very sensitive. And he got cut off the air. And I'm trying to remember exactly how the story went, but I think he got a phone call, if I remember correctly, because then he played it back over the air, if I'm not mistaken. And the person, he says it was a very mysterious voice. And the voice said, "You think we're not listening every single night, Art?
And he was on
we can't
Coast
just
to
shut
Coast,
you down."
right? Was he on Coast to Coast?
He was Coast to Coast.
Okay.
For years, he was the guy.
Before George Noory, right?
Oh, he was on probably for 20, 25 years before George Noory.
And he was talking about sensitive subjects.
UFOs, ghosts, cattle mutilations, Linda Moulton Howe, for example.
So did they fire him or pull him off?
They pulled a coup to get him off. And when he tried to come back, like a coup d'etat.
Oh, okay.
Okay, they didn't want him on the air anymore. So they made false accusations, false sexual accusations. He ultimately got cleared. Meanwhile, he got taken off the air.
Whoa.
And then when he finally got back on again, it only lasted for a couple of months.
Right.
He had his own show on Sirius Radio. Okay, satellite radio, like a lot of people have in their cars. And they decided to take him off. I forget what the reason was. It was bogus. And he says, "I didn't notice when I signed the contract that if they decided to take me off the air, I couldn't restart my own network on another network or transmission source." So in other words, he couldn't take his show to NBC or CBS or ABC or some big radio network. So he says, "So I'm off the air for good." He made a YouTube where he told the whole story. Oh, he did? Okay, good. Yeah, he says, "I'm sorry, folks. I'm not going to be back."
So that's when they brought in George Nuri, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
I
And
like George Nuri. I like George Nuri. The only thing I will say about him is I wish he would take more of a stand in his beliefs.
I agree.
He rides this very safe line. And we're at a
Yes.
time in our life right now when we just don't need to be taking safe lines and standing in the safe corner of the room. We need to step out and be a voice. So if
And
he had
ask
more,
questions. Yes.
yeah, if he had more compassion and just honesty with himself and speaking about these issues with his truth and be more in his power, I think I would really admire George Nori all the way. Like,
Yes.
I think what he has is very special. I think he's a very special person, and I love everything he does. I've heard hundreds of episodes over these years. I've heard so
Yes.
many. His questions are thoughtful and very good, and he's very insightful, very intelligent, but he'll always stop right before it goes a little too far, where he has to take ownership of whether or not he believes in what the person is saying, or
Exactly.
whether he and he steps back and says, well, anything's possible. We don't know. Like, it could
Yeah.
be. And he rides this line. And that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this show is to hell with it. I'm not writing any line. I'm going to speak my truth. And at the same time, I'm going to be responsible. I'm going to be compassionate. I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to help people understand what's happening. And I kind of feel like I'm a bridge that can come over from the world that people who are not exposed to this type of information, and hopefully bring it to them in a way that's not scary. Because
Exactly.
even though with my power outage and everything, I'm laughing. I mean, I'm not
Yes.
scared at all.
Yeah.
I think it's funny.
It was just peculiar timing, right?
Very, very peculiar.
Yes. Yes.